This is the last event of the week, which is very sad, but it's not the last thing the Christian Union are going to put on. We'll tell you at the end about what they're going to do to really follow on from what's been happening this week. But this final talk of the week is the search for real life. Come and see real life. How can I live life to the full? So to get us thinking about the subject of what life is all about, I thought I'd start by showing us a banned commercial. And you'll see why it was banned a little bit later on. Don't worry, it's not kind of pornographic or anything, but it might be interesting. Have a look and see what you think. You can see, can't you, why that only got shown about 3 times before Trading Standards actually took it off the air. Because, well, I don't need to explain. But the philosophy of Xbox, life is short, play more. It may make us laugh, but actually, for some of us, maybe that is our philosophy in life. Life is short, you've only got one life, so make sure you enjoy it. Make sure you live life to the full. Make sure you have as much fun as possible before we hit the grave. And of course, when that's our philosophy of life, the one thing we're probably not going to spend much time thinking about is religion and maybe Christianity. Because our impression of God is so often that God is the cosmic killjoy. If we want to have fun, if we want to enjoy ourselves, if we want to live life to the full, then we would think that looking into Christianity and the life of Jesus wouldn't be the place to find it. And maybe your impression of Christianity is Ned Flanders. This is Ned Flanders, and this is what he says about his life. He says, "Listen, folks, there's no magic formula. I just follow the 3 C's. Clean living, chewing thoroughly, and a daily dose of vitamin church. And of course, I resist all major urges. No, no, and double no. I haven't done any of those things, folks. You name it, and I haven't done it." And Homer says, "Geez, Flanders, you're 60 years old, and you haven't lived a day in your life." Well, maybe that's our impression. You know, church is there to make people into, well, Ned Flanders types, to take away our fun, to take away our joy, and any sense of excitement in life. One church billboard in America maybe sums up what some people think. Why be depressed alone? Come inside and join us. So if you want to live life to the full, most of us would think avoiding God and church and all that Jesus stuff is probably the best way to do it. But actually, is our problem in life that we want too much joy? Or is it that we settle for too little? C.S. Lewis was an atheist and a professor until he became a Christian. And obviously, you may know, he's written many books. But he said this about the search for life and joy. He said, "It would seem that our Lord finds that our desires are not too strong, but too weak. We are half-hearted creatures fooling around with drink and sex and ambition when infinite joy is offered us. Like an ignorant child who wants to go on making mud pies in a slum because he cannot imagine what is meant by an offer of a holiday at the sea, we are far too easily pleased." See, what C.S. Lewis is saying is actually if you really understood what was involved in knowing Jesus, you would find that actually the problem is not that we desire too much joy, but we settle for too little. That we actually think ultimately in life, you know, if we can get through university with a solid 2 or a 2-1 at best, and if we can maybe, you know, enjoy ourselves at the weekend and spend our student loan fairly quick in the term and, you know, maybe have fun, get a few girlfriends, if we can have that, life's great. But what if life was so much more? What if there was more joy and more life to be had that we haven't even scratched the surface of? See, one of the things I find really interesting about Jesus is this. When Jesus describes what it is to know him and to live in relationship with him, he doesn't describe it as a funeral. Maybe that's what we would describe it as. But Jesus says actually to know him and to live in relationship with him is best described as a feast. It's a banquet with great food and brilliant wine. That's the metaphor more than any other that he uses to describe it. And that's why it's quite fitting tonight that we've started with a feast. And we've been able to enjoy great food. I'm sorry that we didn't get the wine. You'll have to do that later. But that picture of food and friendship, that's what the Christian life is all about. I was having dinner with some friends of mine and a load of their work colleagues. And we were kind of chatting over and chewing over the big questions of life. And this one girl, she said, well, I'm an atheist. But if I was going to invent, a religion, I would want a Christian life to be something like this. She said, I want it to be like tonight's. A great meal, fantastic wine like this red that we're drinking, and great friendship. And I said, but that's exactly how Jesus describes the Christian life. That's the picture that we have. It's a brilliant picture. And in fact, the people that were most put off Jesus were not the party types, but actually the religious types. The people that were always trying to live life right. And they couldn't understand that Jesus would go to parties and hang out with the wrong crowd, that he would turn water into wine. I mean, we imagine that Jesus should have turned wine into water. That's what a religious person would do, but he did the opposites. Jesus invited people to come and enjoy real life. And it was the religious guys that were most upset. In fact, on one occasion, Jesus was having a dinner party with a group of very irreligious types. And the religious people were kind of at the door looking in and tutting to themselves about the fact that Jesus, this supposed religious leader, is hanging out with such dubious company. And so Jesus tells a story to illustrate what he had come to do, and it goes like this. He said there was a man who had 2 sons. The youngest son one day said to his father, Father, give me my share of the estates. So his father divided his property between them. Not long after that, the younger son got together all he had, and he set off for a distant land where he squandered his wealth on wild living. After he had spent everything, there was a severe famine in that country, and he began to be in need. So he went to a citizen of that country and hired himself out to feed pigs. He longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs are eating, but nobody gave him anything. When he came to his senses, he said to himself, how many of my father's men have got food to spare? And here I am starving to death. I know. I'll get up. I'll go back to my father and I'll say, Father, I've sinned against heaven and against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired men. So he got up and he went back to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him. He ran to him, threw his arms around him and kissed him. The younger son said, Father, I've sinned against heaven and against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. But his father said, quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Let's kill the fattened calf and have a feast and celebrate. Because this son of mine was lost and he's found. He was dead and he's alive again. And so they began to celebrate. Meanwhile, the older brother was out in the field. And when he came near to the house, he heard the sound of music and dancing. And so he called one of the servants over. What's going on? He asked. Your brother's come home, the servant replied. And your father has killed the fattened calf because he has him back safe and sound. Well, at that, the older brother became angry and he refused to go in. So his father came out and pleaded with him. But he answered his father, look, all these years I have been slaving for you, and I've never disobeyed your orders. But you didn't even give me a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours, who squandered your property with prostitutes, comes home, you kill the fattened calf for him? My son, the father said, you're always with me and everything I have is yours. But we had to celebrate and be glad because this brother of yours was dead, and he's alive again. He was lost, and now he's found. That's the story that's sometimes called the story of the prodigal son. It's found in Luke's account of the life of Jesus, chapter 15. In fact, it's memorized fairly word for word if I did my job properly. But one of the reasons why I read that out from my memory rather than from the page is often when we read the Bible, we can read it as something, well, I don't know, something very distant. You know, sometimes we imagine it being read in funereal voices in dark and dusty buildings. There was a man who had 2 sons, and all of that kind of stuff. But actually we forget that actually before some of the Bible was written, it was first spoken. Jesus told stories. Stories not to send people to sleep, but to wake people up. Stories to drive home a point, and in particular this story does. See, it's a story about a guy who leaves home. It's a shocking story. It's a shocking story, but you're thinking, well, it's not shocking to leave home today, is it? I mean, you've all, mostly I guess, left home to come to university. And I'm sure probably most of your parents are quite happy about the fact that you left home. And so why is it shocking that this son in this story leaves home? Well, it's the nature in which he leaves home that is so shocking, isn't it? What does he say to his dad? He says, "Dad, give me my share of the inheritance." Now, when do you normally get your parents' inheritance? Or your inheritance from your parents? When they die. But this guy's dad is still alive and kicking. And he's saying to his dad, "Dad, that stuff I'm going to get when you die, I want it now. I want to live as if you were dead." Now that's pretty shocking, isn't it, in any culture? But actually Jesus is saying, that's the kind of thing we often do with God, either implicitly or explicitly. We say to God, "God, I want to live as if you didn't really exist. And if you're there, I'm just going to ignore you." Now why? Why did the guy in this story do that to his dad? Well, I think it's because he reckons that if he wants to experience real life, real joy, he's not going to find it at home. My dad's so restrictive, he must have thought to himself. Being at home is so boring. If I can get away from home and away from my dad, I could have far more fun. And actually, if you think about it, often our reason for rejecting God is not simply intellectual, is it? I don't think God exists. But sometimes, if we're honest, it has to also be a moral reason. We don't want God to exist. Because the God that we so often imagine is that cosmic killjoy. And so our reason for rejecting him can be often that we want to do our own thing. Listen to what one atheist put it, or how we put it, Aldous Huxley. He said, "I did not want the world to have any meaning. Therefore, I had no difficulty in arguing that it had none. The philosophy of meaninglessness was an instrument of liberation, sexually and politically, for me and my friends." It's very honest. He says, I wanted to get rid of meaning and get rid of God because that it meant I could do what I wanted. Or listen to Thomas Nagel, professor of philosophy, also an atheist at New York University. He says, "I want atheism to be true, and I'm made uneasy by the fact that some of the most intelligent people I know are religious believers. It isn't just that I don't believe in God and naturally hope there is no God. I don't want there to be a God. I don't want a universe like that." And maybe that's some of us. We think, actually, we don't want God getting involved in our lives, because if he did, he would ruin it. Maybe that's you. Well, what does he do? He leaves home, and I'm sure for a while, we don't know how long, he has a great time. Does all the things he wanted to do, spends the money that he's got, and for a while it's great. But the problem is, it doesn't last, does it? There comes a point when the money runs out, and quite literally the food runs out too. And I'm not here to say, and I don't think the point of this story is to say that if you live without Jesus, your life will be one long, miserable existence, because many of you know that's not true. You've lived, maybe some of you, without any thought of God, and you've had great times in your life, great joys. The point is not that without Jesus we can never experience any happiness, but it's always transient, isn't it? And it never really lasts. And it can be a very unstable foundation. The realization of your hopes can often be less than the expectation. You get it, but is it quite what you expected? I'm a big rugby fan. I used to play rugby, but now I just watch it. But I am old enough to remember quite distinctly when we won the Rugby World Cup. I just moved to my current home in Bournemouth. And 2003, having been brought up on rugby, I remember thinking about this and thinking, wouldn't it be amazing if we could win the World Cup? And we finally got to the World Cup final. We were playing Australia in Australia. And if you can't remember it, get it out on DVD or whatever and watch the game. It's great fun, particularly beating Australia in Australia. That's great fun. We're not going to do it in cricket this year, so at least remember about how we did it in the rugby. But there I was watching this. I was so nervous I couldn't eat my bacon butties. And I remember, how it got to the final and the final few minutes, it was extra time, it was level, and then Jonny Wilkinson gets the ball. He's missed 2 drop goals already, and then he scores. And I'm like, come on! And I remember jumping up and down on this settee that didn't belong to me, hugging someone I didn't even know, and just like throwing bacon butties across the room. And it was just incredible. It was amazing. And yeah, it was just like the best moments of my sporting life. And, which was watching, yeah. There wasn't really any great moments in my actual playing life, so but it was amazing. But the weird thing was, it was in Australia, so it was like 10 o'clock in the morning when we won the World Cup. And I remember like watching it, and then you watch all the kind of, the after-match analysis and all of the interviews, and then eventually the programme finishes about midday. And then I'm like, there's nothing else about rugby on TV. And then I just remember thinking to myself as I walked home, what do I do now? It's lunchtime. We've won the World Cup. What do I do after that? And it was just this like massive feeling of anticlimax. I mean, it doesn't get any better than that. And now it's like, oh, what next? In fact, I was reading an interview with Jonny Wilkinson. And Jonny Wilkinson said that he actually felt something similar. Well, not that he knew how I felt. He doesn't know who I am. But he said after winning the World Cup, he thought to myself, well, what do I do now? I've reached the pinnacle of everything I could aim for in life, and yet, is that it? Someone once put it this way. They said, one of the worst things that can happen to you in life is you can get everything you want. Because you can get everything you want and realize that it's not everything you need. You achieve those dreams, but do they really satisfy, and do they stay? Pascal, the French mathematician, put it this way. He said, man tries unsuccessfully to fill this void that with everything that surrounds him, seeking in absent things the help he cannot find in those that are present. But all are incapable of it. This infinite abyss can only be filled with the infinite, that is to say, God himself. From the time we have forsaken him, it's a curious thing that nothing in nature has been capable of taking his place. See, the thing is, when we take God out of our lives, yes, there are moments of happiness and moments of joy, but nothing that can ultimately fill that void, and no foundation that can ultimately be strong enough to build our life on. And so, where does this guy in the story end up? He ends up in a pigsty, which I'm guessing was probably not his #1 career choice when he left university, was it? I have to be careful what I say about pig farmers. I was talking about this once, and there was a pig farmer in the audience, and so I won't be too rude about them, but I imagine pig farming was not what he wanted to do. This guy's life has just hit a new level of the pits. And yet it's actually quite a good place, isn't it? Because it's the first place in this guy's life and in the story where he really stops to think. When he really stops and presses pause on the remote control of life and asks the big questions about where he's coming from and where he's going and what's really important in life. And sometimes it's only when things go wrong that we actually ask those questions. I'm going to ask someone to come and join me now. Dalton is hiding over there with his rugby mates, and give him a round of applause as he comes up onto the stage. We'll give you a microphone as well. That would be useful. Now, Dalton, you're a big rugby fan. How old were you in 2003?
I actually I was living in America at the time. I haven't even watched the game. Could you believe it? I was living in America and I didn't even watch the game. But I think I was like, I don't know, 8 or something.
That is because you're not actually English, isn't it?
I'm Irish. I couldn't care less about what England did. Yeah.
Ooh. Yeah. But you're a big rugby guy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That sounds really bad, doesn't it?
Yeah, no, but...
I love to play rugby. Yeah.
Like rugby.
Yeah.
And so obviously next
I don't
week,
like rugby blokes, though.
Sorry?
I don't really like the rugby lads like them over there. They're not.
Okay.
And I'm not into that.
No, okay.
I'm just trying to not come across as a rugby lad here.
It's all right. You're a very nice guy, really. Yeah. So predictions for next weekend?
Ireland are playing England next weekend, and I think Ireland will win, undoubtedly. Yeah.
Okay, we'll see.
I'm pretty sure of that.
Okay. Yeah. I'll Facebook you.
Yeah.
Good, but actually we're not here to talk about rugby,
No.
believe it or not. Actually, something happened this summer, didn't it, that really kind of rocked your life? What was it?
Yeah, straight into the deep end then. Yeah, this summer, this summer I was on holiday in Greece, and was walking along the beach in Greece, and I just kind of collapsed with this abdominal pain. Initially, really severe pain, and I was taken to hospital, and what I thought was just, I don't know, food poisoning. I ate a lot of kebabs the day before. A lot of kebabs. It turned out to be a tumor. I had a tumor in my small intestine, about 8 centimeters. I think it was 8 centimeters in diameter. So it's about just smaller than a tennis ball. And I ended up spending 8 weeks in hospital. I spent 3 weeks in Greece, which was a lot like a pigsty. I would never go to Greece. It's just the most terrible place on the planet.
Are there any Greeks here? I'm just apologising.
I do apologise.
To you.
Specifically the hospital.
He is a rugby lad.
Specifically the hospital in Greece. The hospital in Greece is just horrible. Yeah, I spent 3 weeks there, and then another 4 weeks in hospital, 5 weeks in hospital in Dublin. Life transformed. Lost 5 stone, which actually did me a lot of favours. But I nearly died. So I had 3 operations. I had 3 kind of major operations, and after the third one, my family were kind of told to prepare for the worst. And if I wasn't going to die, I was going to have to be kind of fed off an intravenous drip for the rest of my life. So I got to a point, a lot like this guy in the pigsty, where I was suddenly kind of confronted with the prospect of death, which as a 22-year-old rugby lad who thinks he's invisible is quite invincible. Definitely not invisible.
Your mates think you're invisible because they always look away when you're talking to them, apparently, but that's another story.
Regardless. But that's an inside joke. There's a lot of people here.
Sorry.
It was shocking. It was really shocking because I thought I was going to die. So that kind of just transformed my life and transformed kind of how I looked at life. Yeah.
How did it make you question things in terms of looking back on your life before that?
So I became a Christian just as I came to uni. I was 19. Although I'd grown up in a Christian family, I kind of was shipped off to boarding school, as you do, and consequently actually grew up in quite a secular environment. But having come to uni, I kind of went to things like this and started to kind of look into Christianity a little bit more and the evidence for Christianity. And long story short, became convinced and became a Christian. And then the last 3 years kind of went by very quickly. And although I was a Christian, I wasn't convinced by what you were saying, what you've just said in your talk. I wasn't sure that actually my faith offered me the opportunity for true meaning in life. I thought that actually most of my satisfaction and my meaning in life depended upon kind of success and my own personal success, primarily like on the rugby pitch. I was convinced that the better I did at rugby, the better my life would be, and the better people would think of me, and more respect I'd have, and my life would be better. And I guess looking on from that, kind of when I left university, I was convinced that if I could just get a good job and earn a lot of money, I will be happy and utterly content. So what this summer did to change that viewpoint was I suddenly realized, as I was kind of on that kind of deathbed, as it were, how just futile that viewpoint is. It was totally irrelevant how good I was at rugby. It was totally irrelevant what my friends or my peers thought of me, or how successful I was, or how much money I'd earned. Actually, the only thing that mattered on that moment was the fact that I was a Christian, because I consequently had a hope beyond death. I had a relationship with my Creator, as ridiculous as that sounds. And so I guess how it confronted me, but I realized the futility of stuff that I was so convinced.
And that was just this summer. How does that change your perspective now? How do you look at life now?
So I don't get me wrong, not now that I've become a Christian suddenly, or now that I've kind of had this experience and I don't care about being successful, that's not the case at all. I still want to hopefully play rugby again and play as well as I can. And I would love to get a good job and money. I would be lying to you if I said that wasn't the case. But I think now what I've really kind of learned is that these things don't determine my satisfaction in life. And how good my life is. Actually, like, although they're great and I'll work my hardest to achieve these things or whatever, at the end of the day, if I don't play well at rugby and if I don't get a job and earn lots of money in the city or whatever, it doesn't matter. At the end of the day, I have a relationship with my Creator, and one day I'll be going to heaven. And consequently, it's just brought me a lot of peace. I can just relax, and I can just kind of enjoy rugby, and I can look forward to getting a job and working, because I know that even if I'm not successful, it doesn't matter. My life will still have meaning. So that's kind of what this summer did for me, and it's been life-changing in that regard.
Fantastic. Yeah. Thank you so much.
No problem. Thank you.
If you want to hear more, I'm sure I'd be happy to chat more to you later. Back to the story. Here's this guy in the story. He's in a pigsty. And, okay, what we've just heard is quite a shocking kind of event like that, something that makes people think. But actually, it's important, isn't it? Wouldn't it be sad if actually all of us had to get to that point of nearly dying before we actually ask the big questions in life? Wouldn't it actually be much more sensible, even if we're not on our deathbed, to really think through what the foundation to life is and where we're heading? To come to that point where we press pause and ask those big questions. And maybe this week has been the opportunity for some of us to do that, to really start to think seriously and to ask those questions that maybe we've never had the time to or never thought of doing before. Well, this guy in the pigsty realizes that actually he's got a bit of a bum deal. That actually he was setting out in life to enjoy life, but actually it wasn't all it was cracked up to be, and so he decides to go home. But of course he's got a problem, hasn't he? He's gone away from home, he's spent his father's wealth, he's shamed his father's name, and so he can't just rock up back home, particularly in that culture. And so he comes up with a plan. He thinks, if I go home, I'll have to have something to say. And so he practices this speech probably over and over again on the way home. Father, I've sinned against heaven and against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired men. In other words, what he's going to do is he's going to try and earn his way back. He thinks, well, I've squandered my dad's money. I can't pay him back because I've got no money to pay. But I can give him my life and try and be a slave. And maybe one day he'll accept me again if I slave away really, really hard. And that's often how we think about how we might come back to God, isn't it? If there is a God and we have rejected him, then that God obviously kind of wants us to earn our way back to him, be really good, go to church, rack up the religious brownie points in the hope that one day God might just think that we're tolerable. And yet, this story is so shocking, isn't it? Perhaps shocking to us, incredibly more shocking to the culture in which Jesus was speaking it. Because when this guy starts coming home and he comes over the brow of the hill, what happens? His dad has obviously been looking out of the window and he sees him still a long way off and he starts running. Now imagine if you were the old or the younger brother, you're coming home and you can't yet see the expression on your father's face. You can see this guy running towards you, and it's only as he gets closer that you can see that the expression on his face is not one of anger, but of love. And as he gets closer, he opens his arms out to welcome him home, back into the family. He starts his speech, I've sinned against heaven, I've sinned against you, make me like one of your hired men. No, he doesn't actually get there, does he? He doesn't have to, because his dad has already stuck a robe on his back and a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. That's not the attire of a slave. That's the welcome of a son. You see, what the Father is saying is you don't have to earn your way back. You're welcome back just as you are. Even though stuff's a mess and you could never earn your way back to me, I'm welcoming you back. And the great thing that I find about the God of the Bible is he's not like a vindictive judge who makes us earn our way back to him, but God says, I'm willing to welcome you back. You don't deserve it, but against all the odds, he holds out his arms in welcome. He doesn't give us the shame that we deserve, but takes the shame we deserve. See, in that culture, it was very shameful for a grown man to run. And yet, in this story, what does this grown man do? He literally kind of probably hitches up his little skirt type thing that he would have had and legs it down the high street doing the 100-meter sprints. Yeah, he doesn't care what anyone else thinks of him. He takes upon himself the shame that the son should have had. to welcome him home. And actually, this is just a story, but actually it's in the context of a bigger story that's true. And that is of a God who was willing to come not just out of town, but out of heaven to us, to take upon himself the shame and the guilt and the consequences of the mess that we've often made of our lives. To hold out his arms in welcome on a cross as he takes what we deserve so that we could have the welcome that we don't deserve. And this, God says, we're welcome to come home. One last thing. This guy, when he leaves home because he wants to have a party, doesn't he? He wants to have a good time. He wants to enjoy life to the full. And yet, ironically, where is the best party in this story? It's the party at the end of the story in the very home that he left. I mean, they come back and they kill the fattened calf. Someone said that, the fattened calf and the older brother, the two characters that aren't happy about the return of the older son. Like the fattened calf. But they have a barbecue. They have fillet steak. It's fantastic. It's not even sausage casserole. It is, it's great sausage casserole. But this is like the tops. And I think the point is this. Look, we look in life for joy and life to the full, and we search for it in different places. And yet, where is it found? In the one place where we didn't expect to find it. In knowing the God of the universe. Not in institutionalized religion, of course not. But in a relationship with the God who made you, who loves you and welcomes you home. And can I say, just as Dalton can say, that being a Christian doesn't mean you want to have success in education or rugby, but there is a joy and a security that undergirds your life, that doesn't take away from these things, but enhances the joy of them even more. Because they're not the foundation. They're just the fruit. And the foundation is knowing God that gives us greater joy in every area of life because of it. And just like the son in this story, God says, you're welcome to come home. Before we finish, I'm just going to invite Nathaniel to come back up. And he's going to sing just one song that was actually inspired by this story. And so I just want us to kind of quietly just listen to the words and use it as an opportunity just for a couple of minutes to reflect on that story, to reflect on the words. And maybe as you think about that story and you think about that as an analogy of our lives, think about where you might place yourself in that story and which scene of that story you would be in at the moment. Thanks, Nathaniel.
Everyone is looking to feel like they belong. It's not something you fake as you go along. Ooh, yeah, we can make up the answers, try to find our own peace of mind, or will it all just unwind? Everyone's fighting their insecurities in a hope that they will feel at ease. Ooh, yeah, we can do what we want, yeah. We've got it all together, life will be fine. Or will it all just unwind? Somehow I find I cannot define how loved I feel when Jesus said, come to me the tired and weary, come to me all who need rest, come to me the sad and lonely, and I will give you life in this family. where you all belong. I can see the holes now in this cover-up. It hasn't dealt with my fears, they're just building up. Ooh, yeah, we long for the freedom to say and feel that we belong, but I see it all just unwind. Somehow I find I cannot define, no, how loved I feel when Jesus said, come to me the tired and weary, come to me all who need rest, come to me the sad and lonely, and I will give you life amongst this family. Come to me the tired and weary, come to me all who need rest. Whoa. Come to me the sad and lonely, and I will give you life in this family where you belong. Oh yeah, you belong.
So as you think about that story, I wonder, where would you put yourself in that story? There's really three scenes, aren't there, in it? The first scene is the son as he's leaving home. And maybe there are some people tonight, and you're a bit like that. You're saying, well, actually, I've really got no time for God. Thanks for the dinner, but I've got no time for God. And I don't think this is where life is at. And I don't really want this. I haven't got time for it. Now, that might be what you're thinking. Thanks for coming. Thanks for at least listening. But can I just say, before you kind of reject this and ignore it, it's always worth making sure you know what you've rejected. Actually, do you know what you've rejected? Or do you just kind of assume you know what it's about because maybe you've had, a little bit of religion when you were growing up? So often we get just enough of dead Christianity to inoculate us against getting the real thing. I'm not particularly interested in buildings and religions and institutions, but I am interested in Jesus Christ. And so can I encourage you, before you kind of reject this and walk away from it, to make sure you've checked it out. One of the things we've been challenging people to do all week is to take away a segment of the Bible and read it. Start with one of the accounts of Jesus' life and actually check out the real Jesus. Not the Jesus of the stained glass window or the Jesus of our perceptions, but the real Jesus of history, and see what you make of him. Because actually, he's so surprising, and he doesn't always do or say what you'd expect. At the end, there'll be some copies of the New Testament. You could take them away. You don't need to read the whole thing. Maybe start with Luke's account of the life of Jesus and read that. It would take you a couple of hours, but it'd be a good place to start. The second scene in the story is the pigsty, though, isn't it? This guy in this point in his life where he really starts to think. Now, I'm not going to say who's in a pigsty tonight, because hopefully none of us are, but there does come a point where we actually do start to think, and maybe this week has actually caused some people to start to think seriously about these questions. But you've still got lots of questions, and you're still thinking it through. And you're thinking, well, I need more time to really think this stuff through. And if that's you, then the great news is that this isn't the end of what the Christian Union are putting on, but there's something else, which we'll tell you about in just a moment, that you'll find really helpful, where you can think it through, and you can look into this and ask your questions and find out more. But of course, there's a third scene, isn't there? And that's the scene when the son finally comes home. And there'll be other people here tonight. And actually, as you've listened this week to what's been going on, as you've talked about it, and also as you've looked at the lives of your Christian friends, and you've seen something of the joy of Jesus expressed in their lives individually and corporately as they interact together, you think, actually, I want something of that. And the great news is that invitation to the party is open to you as well. We don't have to earn it. It's free, just like tonight was. You didn't have to pay anything. It was free. You just had to come. And Jesus says, you just need to come and receive the invitation and receive what I want to give. Now you might be saying, well, there's a lot I don't understand. That's okay. Because becoming a Christian is not about passing an exam, thank goodness. It's about entering into a relationship. And the joy of that relationship is getting to know this God more and more through your life. You say, well, I don't know what it will mean for my life. Of course you don't, and neither do I. But if this is the kind of God that we've seen, a God who longs to give us life and what is good, not always what's easy, but what is good, then you can trust him with your life, even though you don't know what it will necessarily mean. And so for those that are in that situation tonight, at the end of this week, who are saying, actually, I'm ready, maybe tentatively, to take a step in that direction, then I want to just finish before we have dessert with a short prayer. See, the great news in that story is when the younger brother started coming home, he hadn't got to go far before the father came to him. And God says, actually, if we respond to him, no matter how tentatively that is, he is willing to welcome us and come on board and give us what we've heard about tonight. And so maybe the words of this short prayer would just be really helpful for some tonight as a way of making that return journey, as it were, and starting out back and receiving the welcome that God wants to offer to you. So I'm going to pray in a moment. So maybe we'll just have a moment of quiet. You can just think about what you've heard and maybe consider whether that's something that actually you need to do. If not, just listen. But if it is, then why not? Just echo these words in your own hearts. God, I am sorry for the way I've treated you and often lived my life ignoring you. Thank you that even though often I've made a mess of things, you're willing to forgive me and welcome me back. Please come into my life and help me to enjoy life as it was meant to be lived in relationship with you from now on. And I ask it in Jesus' name. Amen.